Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. I guess it's good afternoon at this point in time, especially when I've been up since 5 o'clock in the morning. I should have a better sense of time and how my day goes. Audra, we have not done a small business innovation hour maybe since August. Does that sound right to you?
That's right, since August, so it's been a while.
And the genesis of these hours or this time together really started last March. And giving people, giving entrepreneurs, giving small business owners, giving this ecosystem here, and it really started in Central Ohio. But we've had people on from Cleveland, we've had people on from Florida as well. Um, a path forward on any given item or pain point or trouble area that they're experiencing with small business. And we wanted to make sure that we were communicating. We wanted to make sure that we were being proactive from our point of view and really trying to emphasize how a network, how a team, how a community can get through the pandemic. And I'm still uh, shocked on a daily basis that we're here on February 19th. 11 months later, still dealing with some of these same things. But I'm glad to get back to these conversations, and I'm glad to get back to trying to build that community once again. Anything that you're seeing from your end down in Cincinnati as you're running the Goldman Sachs this cohort?
Yeah, I mean, John, I think we're still seeing that, the small businesses are still, trying to work their way through, as, there's a lot of fatigue for small business owners right now, obviously from a standpoint of trying to pivot and operate and when is the hope of getting back to a more better normal? How do we continue to navigate some of the financing and grants and opportunities there, which we're going to talk about today. So that's an important piece of it. And, how to really just keep fighting the good small business fight of serving their customers. So, and staying very hopeful about where we see 2021 going. But I think that, we're all definitely interested in turning the page, 2021 and what the future holds. So I hope we have some great conversation about that today.
Well, and you brought up something really uh, important there, Audra, and that is, the small business owner feels the pull on a day-to-day basis of working inside of their business, right? Which we all experience and we all understand, but you also need to be able to step out to work on the business. And then you have all of this financial support that's being thrown at you, which to learn is an uphill battle, and then see how it applies, if it applies, and how best we can apply it to your business is another learning process. And again, the ecosystem, the community that we're trying to create here is really focused on bringing in those outside experts to help and advance and accelerate those conversations for the small business owner. To that end, Audra, why don't you introduce our two guests today, and then we can go ahead and kick it off.
Absolutely. I'm going to let them give a more detailed perspective of what they're bringing to us. But we have Owen Pohl, who is Vice President and Business Banking for Chase. So welcome, Owen. We're certainly glad to have your perspective here. Been working, I know, with business owners for years, and also Mike Bowers from the Small Business Development Center. And I'll let Mike also share your title and perspective on small businesses. So Owen, if you want to give us a little bit of background, we'll start with you.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure. What I get to talk about today is my most favorite thing and most passionate thing, which is how can we help small businesses? Small business owners have so many challenges, and it's so difficult to keep all of the plates spinning and not letting any of them fall. And so however we can be a resource and helpful is really our goal. But what we're seeing today with our clients is a ton of variability. Some clients are really facing tough challenges right now. And then others, because of circumstance, are actually experiencing a growth opportunity. And so this time, the last, gosh, almost exactly a year now, has created a tremendous amount of variability in what clients are needing versus your typical time. So, happy to be a resource for all of those clients, and we'll get into some of those questions and how we can do that a little bit later. But I can kick it back to you, Audra, over to Mike.
All righty, thanks. Oh, and I appreciate that, Mike.
Yeah, thanks a lot. My name is Mike Bowers. I'm the Center Director for the Ohio Small Business Development Center at Columbus State Community College. We serve Central Ohio, Columbus and Central Ohio. And the great thing about the Small Business Development Center is that I've been involved with the program for a number of years, and it's a national program that basically received funding from the SBA and a variety of local partners to really support entrepreneurship all the way from, I want to start a business and I have a great idea and that's all I have. I don't know anything about business. We can sit down and work with them and support them to existing businesses that are looking to grow, launch something new, pivot, shift, whatever that happens to be. And what we've seen over the last year certainly is a lot more existing businesses that are trying to deal with a variety of issues associated with COVID-19 and the restrictions and different things like that. And then I think like Owen said, it's different for a lot of different businesses. Restaurants, bars, they're facing one thing, but manufacturers could be facing something, completely different. They could be shifting, doing PPE or something like that. So we've seen a lot of stuff over the last year. We've supported a lot of the different funding programs that have come in and out over the last year. What I also think is interesting is that over the normal course of a year in Central Ohio, we have about 1,000 people, business owners that we're working with anywhere along that spectrum. In 2020, we ended up with over 2,000. We had about 2,500 businesses that we dealt with. And again, a lot of it was because of, obvious issues they were dealing with, but also trying to get a handle and an understanding on a variety of different programs that were out there. So we've seen a lot over the last year. I'm hoping that we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. But we'll have to see, and we're still not out of the woods. So it's continue a lot of work to do right now.
So let's just start the conversation today. And Owen had said something. You look at businesses who maybe have a really great growth opportunity that has been born out of the past year, or you see businesses that are struggling out of the circumstances of the past year. Is there a checklist? Is there a certain number of financial statements that when a business comes to you, in either case, that you would want to see them have prepared? Do you want them to understand a foundational layer of information when it comes to finances? What are some of the missteps that businesses fall into when they want to go out and seek financing or funding?
Yep, absolutely. It's a great question. And we see, again, variability may be the word of the day because there's a tremendous amount of variability. We have business owners that maybe from a prior background can be what I would call a very experienced borrower. They're used to the financial information that is needed. And then we have the other extreme where someone may be an absolute expert in their particular industry, but it's the first time that they may be borrowing for the business. They may have borrowed on the personal side for a home or a car, things like that. And there's some commonality, but from a business perspective, there is some significant differences there. In terms of the information that is needed, generally speaking, it's historic financial information. For startups, it's going to be, there isn't information like that, so it's going to be heavily weighted upon their business plan, projections, and then other supporting information. If they already have contracts in place, or if there is a stream of workflow that's verifiable, those are wonderful things to be able to augment an application with. Banks most of the time underwrite on the was, which means that we're looking at past financial information because that's the most likely predictor of the future. Clients and business owners tend to live in the present or in the what will be. And so bridging all of those, what is past, present, and future, is part of what the banker's job is. The financial statements, very clearly can tell what the was. Pardon the duplicate words there, but the present and the future, that is where the business owner and the banker and getting to know one another, getting to know the business, as well as their business plan. And oftentimes business owners tend to think, oh, I got my business plan when I was first a startup. I don't really need to do anything with it anymore. Absolutely not. What it becomes is not necessarily a business plan, but it becomes your forecast. It may become your budget for the coming year. So you may not necessarily think in terms of calling it a business plan, but most business owners do have a plan for the future. It just may be called something different, whether it's a forecast or a budget or something like that. But putting all three of those pieces of information together to be able to provide a concise and accurate depiction of the business and what it needs today. And one of the things that is so important to mention is we tend to naturally, as a bank, people tend to naturally think just on the lending side of things. But those financial statements are also equally as important on the depository side of things. And so when you're talking to a bank, really 50% of the time should be spent on borrowing needs, if there are any, and the other 50% of the time on the depository needs of the business. And the most important aspect of that is, how are you going to pay your bills, and how are you going to get paid quickly, efficiently, and least expensively possible? And banks will help on both sides of that. So those financial statements help on all of that. And bankers are absolutely willing to share their knowledge. I know my bankers, each of them manage, anywhere from 75 to 100 clients. And just through sheer repetition, you can't help but learn things that can be shared. And bankers give that information away for free. That is how we differentiate ourselves. And that's not just Chase Bank, that's all banks. The entire industry is very willing to give away that information to help clients however we can. In terms of the specific answer to your question, when you're talking with your bank, ask them for what is your specific requirements. Depending on the size of the request and the scope of it, it may only be 1 year worth of historic information, or it could be as deep as 3 years worth of historic information, which is generally speaking your tax returns on the business and on the personal side. But it's always good to have a quick conversation with your banker beforehand to get a sense of what are they needing. And that way you're not over preparing, but also not under preparing as well.
Mike, let me come to you with a similar type of question, and that is, with the Sbdc, what type of support programs or support people do you have in place to, again, either help business owners get back up and running or apply for a new round of financing or funding? Mike?
You're on mute.
Been doing Zoom for a year and I'm still on mute. So
Phrase of the day, phrase of the year.
Yeah, really. Yeah. So with our office, we have 6 people that do small business advising. So we can sit down with an individual. Now it's all virtual, but we can connect with an individual to help them understand what's needed. So a lot of the stuff that Owen was talking about, we can share that, hey, you're going to need this, you're going to need this, and we can help them start piecing that kind of stuff together. Every month in our office, we have a loan packaging workshop. So it's a free virtual workshop that's available to anybody that will go through a checklist of various items that people need to pull together as they're thinking about going for a loan. So we can support that both on the training end and the actual individual pieces there. I think that what Owen was talking about, is absolutely correct. And I think that that's where a lot of people kind of got caught flat-footed when the coronavirus stuff started. So, we're talking about, we're about 11 months into this. So I remember back on March 16th was the last day that all of our team was together at Columbus State. And we've been virtual ever since then. And that was about the same time. But the week before that is when they were starting to talk about the EIDL loan, the Economic Income Program. And people were wanting to, apply for that. And then a little bit later on, they were wanting to apply for PPP. And then later on, they were wanting to apply for various grants that were opportunities that were out there. But they didn't have their financials in order. They really had not kept themselves organized, and they didn't, a lot of them didn't have a good sense of where their revenue was. They couldn't answer a lot of the questions on the application because they just weren't organized in what they were trying to do. And that delayed their ability to apply for things. And the other thing that we saw was, and I get that it was March, it was still early, but a lot of these types of things were looking for historical information, and they were looking for it from tax returns if they could get it. So they didn't have their tax returns. They didn't have everything organized to do their tax returns. Now, luckily, some of the programs, allowed them to go back to 2018 returns and different things like that. But a lot of them just weren't organized enough to do this. So, really what I think that they really need to be thinking about is, how do I get myself ready, my business ready? How do I update my plan so that when opportunities arise, how do I'm ready to take advantage of those, as opposed to having to scramble to try to figure out how to get my business affairs in order so that I can do that.
And Mike, I think you bring up a really great perspective of people being unprepared. I think around, when all of this started, we also, business owners really learned what it meant to work on their business and have that information prepared, and also what their relationship looked like with all of the various resources that they as business owners could tap into. So I think Sbdc, their bankers, we had a lot of conversation with small businesses around their relationship with their banker. And I think that was another thing they didn't really see as an important piece of their world of being a business owner and running that business, right? So didn't see a need for resources and didn't see so much a need for that banking relationship. And so to that end, Owen, I want to come back to you and talk about excuse me, about where we are on so we've got another round of PPP that we're going through right now, right? Second round of PPP, but we're also looking at all of the forgiveness of the first PPP. So maybe you can give us a perspective for business owners on, if you haven't applied for forgiveness, or things that you need to be ready to do to apply if that's still an opportunity for them, and then where the opportunities still exist on the second round and what you're seeing from your lending perspective.
Absolutely. The most recent round of PPP funding, just to sort of keep them straight, I'm calling PPP 2021.
Okay.
And so those are the funds that are available today for business owners. And it's very similar from a broad sense to PPP 2020, with one exception. If from a broad sense, one exception, if this is your second advance on the PPP funds, for the second go round, you have to prove, or depending on the size of the request, at least attest that you had a 25% reduction in revenue in one of the quarters in 2020 as compared to that same quarter in 2019. And it only has to be one. It doesn't necessarily have to be all of them. But in terms of the requirements to be able to apply for that, it is more robust than what was PPP 2020. Sadly, the reason why the documentation requirements have become so much more robust is, unfortunately, there is always some bad apples in any type of circumstance, and there was a fair amount of fraud that was that occurred during PPP 2020. And so in an effort to try to eliminate that as much as possible, the SBA, and really I shouldn't say the SBA, because they're actually implementing what is the most recent stimulus bill requirements. So they're following the set of instructions that were laid out for them within that legislation, and then banks are then also following suit from there. And so it is absolutely not appropriate to call, this is the SBA's rules or these are banks' rules. These are the rules within the legislation that was passed, and making sure that everybody understands that. And they're absolutely really well intended. And I would say for 95% of business owners, they're great programs, but with all things, there's some gaps. When you put something together really, really quickly, it may not necessarily cover all business circumstances, but absolutely there are other programs, and a great plug for the Small Business Development Center and Mike and his folks. They're a wonderful clearinghouse for information that relates to all of the various programs that are out there. Quite frankly, it's very difficult to keep them all straight, and they've done a very good job of being sort of the air traffic controller that is knowledgeable on all of these programs to help clients. But on the PPP side of things, most larger institutions have put together via their traditional bank website a portal where you can apply and upload your application materials. Back to kind of the original question, be very, very specific and absolutely read for detail the checklist of documentation that is required, because the documentational requirements are a little bit different depending on the type of entity that you are. In some cases, for example, if you're a sole proprietor or a sole member LLC that files under your Schedule C on your personal tax return, you do need to supply that Schedule C or the first generally 7-8 pages of your personal tax return. In other cases, if you're an S Corp or a C Corp, you may not necessarily need to provide your tax returns. Other documentation like your 940 or your W-3 or your 4 quarters of 941s are allowable. The nice part with PPP 2021, you can use either 19's information or 2020's information, whichever is more advantageous for you. But what you can't do is have mixed years. So you can't supply Schedule C from 2019 and then additional supporting information that's from 2020. It does need to be linear. That is one of the common mistakes that we're seeing, and we have updated our website to bold print some of those things to really draw attention for some common mistakes and errors that we're seeing. And also keep in mind, as these programs are being executed, just like the first go around, this is very much an airplane that is being built as it's being flown. There are changes that are occurring as they're going along, and by and large, it's to make things easier, or it's to close a loophole that somehow fraud has started to creep in on. And so there was a circumstance a couple of weeks ago where you could supply a bank statement to verify activity for February 15th of 2020, which is the important date that you have to prove that you were in business at that time. Well, today that's no longer an acceptable document. It needs to be either a payroll statement or your 941 from first quarter of 2020. And that's, again, the the building the plane as you're flying it, there are some changes and tweaks that have occurred along the way. And so again, pay very close attention to those checklists. Switching over on the forgiveness side of things, the stimulus bill that was passed late in December did some really great things in making applying for forgiveness for about 80% of loan holders, as they're a loan today, but eventually it'll be forgiven, because it made those loans under $150,000 much easier to go through the forgiveness process. It's more in line with the under $50,000 threshold, which is by and large an attestation that you spent the funds appropriately. You still want to hold your documentation. Make sure you set that aside in a folder that you label really well, because there could be an audit process to that if there ever is. That way you've got it handy and can pull out and verify that, yes, in fact, we did spend the monies in the appropriate ways. For loans over 150,000, it is still the same forgiveness process in that you do need to provide documentation that verifies that you spent the funds in the appropriate ways. And it is worthwhile, as I was saying, the plane's being built and planes changing as it's flying. The amount of money that you can spend on payroll versus other allowable expenses has changed over subsequent stimulus bills from last, I think, March, I think was the first one, maybe late March of last year through the most recent one. It's now a 60-40 split. You need to spend 60% of your proceeds on payroll or payroll related expenses. And that can be benefits, the business's portion of the expense towards retirement and some other related things. And then 40% can be spent on other allowable expenses. That list has grown to be fairly extensive. So what I would recommend is that you go to the SBA.gov site to review their list of what's an allowable expense. For the most part, it's utilities and rent, but there are some other things that are now allowable within that. If your business had to ramp up personal protection, those types of things have now been included in that 40% that are allowable expenses. So long answer there. I'll pause for a little bit.
Well, let's give Mike a turn to answer a question here. And I actually wanted to take it on a parallel track to what Owen just discussed. Let's say that we had opportunities coming out of 2020 and we started a new business, right? That's maybe tangentially related or a supporting business. Or let's say that we purchased a business that received PPP funding, but it's a completely new entity, asset sale, new business entirely. What type of avenues does either EIDL or PPP first or second round provide to a new business coming out of this?
Well, the challenge with new businesses is that, again, for EIDL, PPP, or they're still looking at historical. So they're looking to determine, have you had this reduction in income? Now, depending on your definition of new business, if you started in January, you're probably not going to qualify. But if you started in 2020, there is opportunities with the PPP to get in there. It's the same thing for the EIDL. I mean, they're going to look for some historical data to support that you have some sort of need, and to be able to pull this together. So that's been one of the tricks and one of the challenges, is that we get a lot of people that are interested in starting businesses. So we put together an entire process to deal with individuals that want to start businesses. A lot of them hear about, okay, well, here's the stimulus programs and here's the grant programs that have come out of that. Here's the grant programs that different municipalities, states, and different things are doing. And they start to think, okay, well, these are grants that I can use to start my business. And unfortunately, that's not really the case. So they got to kind of do things the old-fashioned way and build it kind of from the ground up and figure out how they're going to pull some of this together. Now, again, if they did that, I know some businesses that did that in the spring, summer, that saw an opportunity. So when you have this kind of flux and you have these kind of changes and uncertainty, it's actually a great time to start a business, because if you can see the gaps in the market that are there, and you saw a lot of people around PPP or PPE creation and development and stuff like that, that saw gaps and were able to actually either pivot their business or start a business to take advantage of these opportunities. However, you're probably not necessarily, depending on when you started, you may or may not be able to access these particular funds. We did a lot of work with the city of Columbus, and Franklin County had a grant program last year over the summer. And, and people need to understand when they talk about grant programs, I mean, there are no real free money. There's no just, hey, I need $10,000, here's $10,000. They're really going to be looking at, you still had to be able to show that there was some need. You have to, like Owen said in one of the cases, you have to show you were actually in business to be able to do some of these types of things. And, they weren't able to take advantage of these things. So then they were like, I don't know what I need to do. So, so for new businesses, for early businesses, again, whenever you're talking about it, they may or may not be able to take advantage of it. But, if you started in 2020, you got going, then things impacted. There's a shuttered venue grant that the SBA is developing, which is for live venues, movie theaters, performing venues and things like that. Now, it's not ready yet. You can't apply for it yet. But, if the entity, was in operation, within the time window to do that, I think you had to be in operation as of February 29th of 2020. So if you started something in February of 2020, you could take advantage of this moving forward, as long as you meet all the other qualifications. But you're still in there. So it just kind of depends, again, when you're starting.
Mike, you actually said something interesting that maybe dog your a little thought in my mind, and it was in 2020 there were opportunities for people who saw them, right, or for people who wanted to try and take advantage of that and build something on top of that. This is just a very general conversation, but how do you feel about the state of small business, not only in Central Ohio, but Ohio or the United States in general at this point?
I think that small businesses are still, everybody says the backbone of what's going on. I mean, I think that they really are. They're facing completely different challenges than they faced in 2019. But I think that the opportunities are still there. I think that, it's like I've been saying in our startup workshops. I mean, if you can see an opportunity, you can address that opportunity. And you don't need to go out and get a bunch of funding to do that. Then I think you're in pretty good shape. But, if you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to do this and I got to build this and I've got to create all these types of things. And, for me to do that, I have to go to Owen and say, hey, I want to start this. And, I need, $200,000. I mean, that's going to be problematic. It's always been problematic, but it's going to be, a big problem now. I can't speak to Chase, but I mean, I know that there are banks that, basically cut off doing funding for, early stage and startups, and because they were so busy dealing with their existing clientele to help them grow. I think that there is a situation now where, you know, in the state of Ohio, in the governor's budget, he allocated a large percentage of dollars to support small business. Now, they're still working on that. They're still trying to figure out, you know, where they're going to deploy this and do different things. And I've been on some meetings there. And, you know, one of the things that I think is coming out of that is that you're starting to see there are certain businesses that still need recovery support, you know, whether that's grants or low interest loans or something like that. Those your restaurants, your bars, and those types of things are an easy thing to identify as needing that, because they haven't been able to open certainly at 100%. They've also had some restrictions on the duration of time during a day when they were able to be open. So there are businesses that still need recovery opportunities, but there's also businesses that could use, you know, growth support, or what I would classify really more as stimulus. So this would be stimulating their growth. They're in a position to continue to grow. They're in a position to actually, you know, take off. They don't need money because they have a downturn in revenue. They need money because they're in a position where if they can get some level of funding, they can take off and actually serve the market. So that's, you know, part of the conversation. And again, that in the state of Ohio, that'll all work itself out. But I think small business, you know, it is paring down. But you're seeing opportunities that have grown out of this that you know, wasn't there before. I mean, you know, the ability of a lot of restaurants to do carry out, you know, with drinks and different things like that, you know, that wasn't there in 2019. It is there now, and I think it's going to be there as a different revenue stream for these guys in 2020, late 21, 22, as things continue to progress. So I think that there are a lot of opportunities out there, and it's incumbent on the business owner to really take a step back and look at their market and look at their business and say, hey, this is where I need to be going.
And Mike, I think you bring up a really good point, and I want to let Owen also respond to, you know, the conversation around banks and small businesses working with their banker. I mean, and I'll go back, Owen, to your point about from your perspective and other banks' perspective. I think the business bankers in the world would like to, you know, share that they see themselves as much more of a resource to their customers than maybe they take full advantage of. So in this current state, and I guess to Mike's point, how are you feeling about your business bankers and business banking in general, and about their ability to meet the needs of people who aren't just kind of trying to get into the PPP and the lending and staying afloat, but really continue to be a resource for small businesses?
Yeah, absolutely, and lots of thoughts as we're talking here. But one of the very things that I would like to point out is some banks provide lenders, and some banks provide bankers, and they are different. A lender is someone that is purely focused on the lending side of things. It tends to be more transactional in nature, and that's okay. There's a niche for that, and that works really well. What we provide and what we believe very, very much in is bankers and the relationship that those business owners have with their bankers. And quite frankly, from a relationship standpoint with our business owners, it's never been closer. The last 12 months, because businesses, to your point earlier, you know, they may have been focused on other things, and banking and their banker may not have been in the top 10 of those things. But today, they're very focused on that, particularly, you know, the lending side is, but also on the depository side of things, because all of a sudden now, hey, you know, suddenly the swipe credit card machine that I have doesn't really work anymore for me, because I need something that's mobile that I can carry out to someone's car that's now touchless. So it's triggering a whole nother round of thought of how do I interact with my bank. And it seems relatively simple, but that one thing alone has triggered so many conversations with our clients reaching out to us saying, hey, I got to do something different here. I can't have people come inside and swipe their card anymore. It's not working. And so to your point, the relationships have never been closer. We traditionally operate within a 90-day call expectation where my bankers talk to their assigned clients every 90 days. We have, starting last March, accelerated that to every 60 days to make sure that we're contacting and giving our business owners the opportunity, because it's amazing how many times we'll call and they'll go, oh, I've been meaning to call you for like the last week and I haven't had a chance. And so trying to foster that, make sure that they're aware of the things and tools that they have available to them. In terms of kind of changing gears a little bit with businesses that are starting today, there is still resources available to them, and very much in the same way as it was in the past. Absolutely, lenders are being much more cautious and very real about the economic environment that we are in today, but there are resources both from traditional banks, but also non-traditional lenders. And I'm not talking about, knuckles down on the corner that is lending hard money that hurts you when you don't pay him back. I'm talking about there are lots of quasi nonprofit governmental organizations that provide funding for small businesses. And again, great plug for Mike. His organization is a great resource because there's a lot of various loan programs like that, driven from the city, the county, the states, as well as some federal programs. Most of them do have some job creation expectations, and going back to small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy. Most jobs are created by small businesses in today's environment. When you look at large employers over the last 2 decades, it's been fairly flat to down slightly in terms of the number of people that they are employing. And so job creation, as well as the recovery that will come and will start, most likely, the fledgling of that will be the middle of this year. And quite frankly, we're very bullish and very excited for the second half of this year as well as next year. And history supports that. When we look back at the last 100 years ago with the Spanish flu in late 1918, that was actually the precursor for what was the Roaring 20s, which was a really great time to be alive. And quite frankly, I'm really looking forward to what will probably be the Roaring 20s again, but it'll just be 2022 and 2023 versus 1920 and 21. But the very same pressure of everybody wanting to get out and go do things is being built up, and that pressure will let off, and there will be a lot of businesses that are struggling right now, but we'll have really great second half and really great 2022 years. And that will be what creates, the jobs and get that, unemployment rate back down from, say, 10% today to, something that's maybe a little bit better for the broader economy at, middle single digits. The last piece that I think is very worthwhile that I had jotted down is everyone, when they're funding a business, whether it's a startup or with an existing business, tends to think, I need to borrow first to fuel my growth. That's a piece of it, but there are other resources within your business that you can use to generate cash to fuel growth. And that's where a banker can really help you versus just someone who is a lender. There are ways to create cash within your business by using various tools at your disposal. Most people tend to not realize that a business credit card is a tool for creating cash. They tend to think of it as a tool for creating points and getting free trips, which it absolutely does that, and that's the nice perk of that. But the bigger impact is, if you're not putting a lot of spend on your business credit card, you're not taking advantage of the float that comes along with it. You can pay for something now, but not really spend your cash for 30 days on that. And so oftentimes proper ways of paying your bills and getting paid, and accelerating getting paid and slowing paying bills is a great way to create a little bit of cash. And so maybe if you're only growing 5% for the year, you might be able to fund that through more efficient means of paying bills and getting paid versus borrowing where you have to pay interest on that. And so I would rather do something that doesn't cost me anything first and then think about borrowing above and beyond that. And then the third way, I mean, there's only 3 ways for a business to generate cash to fuel growth. You know, profits, which is cash flow, borrowing, or the owners putting money into the business. And if it's extreme growth, you know, talking about probably greater than 15 to 20%, oftentimes it takes all 3 to really meet that demand when a business is growing that rapidly, especially if it's multiple years in a row where someone is growing 20% every year. To meet that need, oftentimes it takes all 3 sources of cash to be able to do that.
So I'm interested in wins from the past year. Mike, this could be a client of yours through the Sbdc. Owen, this could be a customer that you've seen, that you've worked with, that you've experienced their dips, but then their resurgence. I think just as small business owners and the public in general, we can get behind stories. So I'm interested in a win from both of you that you're willing and not confidentially bound to keep secret.
Yeah. I can kick it off. Obviously, we can't name names, but one of the things that really first occurred to me is there are micro wins everywhere within the small business world. And a win isn't necessarily a business that is flourishing in this environment, but a win, particularly in some industries, means you're getting by and you haven't let anybody go. And there are dozens, hundreds, I'm sure thousands across the state and across the country of business owners sacrificing for themselves to make sure that their employees and their families that are dependent upon those paychecks are retaining their employment. And so first I would say those micro wins that most businesses are experiencing, we should be celebrating those. But in terms of, very specific wins, what has been very interesting is when we think in terms of food, we naturally think, boy, restaurants, they're struggling right now. And yes, they are, some of them, but not all of them. What has been very interesting is the common denominator of length of time in business. A very young business that's in the food service industry today, they're really struggling. They didn't have that opportunity of years of building that loyal client base. But for businesses that have been around for a very long time, quite frankly, if you were to only measure the bottom line, they're doing better than they were before. A restaurant, it's cheaper to operate carry out only than to have dine in. And so we have many clients that have experienced a drop in their top line revenue, but actually a lift in their bottom line revenue because the cost to operate the business is less under the model of carry out only. The other, more people are buying groceries. So all of the support businesses that, at the most basic level, refrigerator trucks, a client of ours that operates a trucking company, you would think, that's not really, but he runs refrigerated trucks. And they are booming right now because of the lift in the transportation that's necessary to get food to the grocery stores. And so things like that have been really exciting to see. They've added 20 new drivers, which are 20 good paying, living wage jobs. And most likely they're not going to go away because they've also picked up some market share as a result of this. And so, something on the surface that you would think, they're not creating masks. They're not saving the world with new technology that, is healing us. It's a trucking company at its most basic level. But because of the niche that they're in and their customer base and that they move food, particularly frozen food, and more of us are buying at the grocery stores. They've experienced a really nice lift, and quite frankly, they're in a part of the state that is not as economically robust as other parts of the state, and so it's been wonderful to be able to create 20 jobs in an area that economically, say, isn't as stable or strong as some of the major cities or Columbus.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that the support businesses, you're really seeing an uptick, and like I said, and I don't see them going away. You know, we had some people that we dealt with that did make that shift to doing personal protection products, the mask and the face coverings and things of that nature. And they've done relatively well because, again, it really fit well to their business, and the opportunity really wasn't there before. The opportunity showed. They said, okay, well, I'm going to jump on this, and it's worked relatively well. One of the ones that I like, I was on a podcast, a couple of months ago. We're doing a program with an organization called Columbus Black, and we are supporting some of the programs that they're doing to support Black-owned businesses in Central Ohio. And Kevin Lloyd, who is the proprietor of that, he brought a young lady on, and she was, a real fireball. She was like really awesome entrepreneur, and she had started her business in February of 2020 with the intention of creating a physical co-working type space. And obviously that became problematic. And she looked at it. She didn't, obviously she was not happy about what was going on because in fact, what she wanted to do. But she looked at it and said, hey, I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to look at, what my opportunities are. And I was so excited to see, okay, she's now shifted it to be a much more virtual program. She's doing a lot to support entrepreneurs and Black-owned businesses and different things of that nature that she probably wouldn't have been doing before. But because now she's doing it virtually and the opportunity is there, she didn't give up. She stuck with it, and she was able to shift her model such that she was able to do that. And and you see a lot of those types of stories. I mean, we've had some really, really good, successes. I mean, successes in 2020 is probably not the same success it was in 2019. But, the business is growing, the business is still there, different things like that. And you're seeing some of those types of things. And John, you see this, all the time, being a business owner yourself, having worked, in business programs at the college, but also through the 10,000 small business piece, where a business, especially now, that can come in to really understand their market. And what do I need to do in 2021 and not be hung with and tied to this is what I did in 2019 and I'm going to stick with that, come hell or high water until the end. And to really, for somebody who says, I'm going to look at my market, I am going to figure out where the opportunities are, and that's where I'm going to go. Those are the ones that are successful.
Mike, I want to piggyback off that because I want to share kind of a story too on what I saw as a win as well as we really wrap this up. And that is in the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program, where, we have the opportunity to bring together groups of small businesses. I think one of the biggest wins is that overarchingly small businesses found their community, right, of small business owners. And if that isn't a win, I don't know what is. And I saw that I've seen that over the course of the last year and a half, in real life action, where I have seen small businesses get together and really work to help each other grow their businesses, whether it is by, choosing to do work for them. So a financial services small business helps a marketing company who then helps him do the marketing and get set up in that way. They order all their promo items from another small business that they've met. And the value of that support for each other in terms of that small business has been a really powerful thing to see. And I think that from a community standpoint, obviously you all are looking to, create those as well. And we're all looking to serve that particular market in different ways than we ever served small businesses before, right? But collectively, what I see here is a real passion for finding ways to help small businesses get plugged in and get connected. And so as we really wrap this up, I want to make sure that people that are listening and will listen to this know how to find both of you as resources moving forward, because you are a wealth of resource. So Owen, if you could share with us how either they reach out to you or a website, what would you like to share for contact information, just real quickly here?
Yeah, twofold. My personal email address is Owen .c as in Charles .pohl @chase.com. And in terms of resources, the chase.com resource site, particularly for PPP, whether it's forgiveness or for applying for this round, it's chase.com / oh shoot, I'm blanking off the top of my head. Go to the chase.com website. It'll get you there. I apologize for that. But please feel free to reach out to me. Happy to help you in any way, and really, quite frankly, in any part of Ohio. I cover Central and Southeast Ohio with my bankers, but I have peers in every community here in the state that I'm happy to make a connection on, as well as make a connection for you with other resources beyond banking. We do our best, just like Mike's organization, to connect folks in other ways just beyond the initial ask. So however we can be helpful. But again, that's owen.c.pohl@chase.com.
Great, thanks, Owen. I appreciate that. Mike, how about you? Where do they find you? Where do they go to the resources for SBDC?
Well, I think that the best place, to reach our office is to go to our website, which is sbdccolumbus.com. On that site, we have a whole video series of things that we've done, which we called Progress Not Panic. It was started in I think April, with a variety of things. For those of you wanting to start small business, we have an online business startup model that you can go and work your way through at your own pace. And it's not just videos of people. It's actually was developed by Columbus State. It's the same type of work that you would be if you were taking a class at the college. So, I mean, John's been involved with these types of things in the past. So it's really interactive, and it's a good opportunity for you to kind of work at your own pace. And we have a piece on there with a variety of COVID resources, as well as our training calendar. I would say that if you are not in the Central Ohio area and you're interested in dealing with the SBDC, like I said, there's close to 1,000 SBDCs around the country. There's 27 in the state of Ohio, and they all provide advising at no cost to the entrepreneur, and they all provide training. So if you go to americassbdc.org, you can actually put in your zip code, and it will give you the closest SBDCs anywhere in the country of where you are. So even if you started, I'm in Columbus and I'm going to move to California, you can do the same thing. You can go work with an SBDC in California, the same as you can work for one here, and really get yourself positioned to take off.
Great. Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate that. And if you're interested in the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program, you can go to 10K SB Apply. That's a national site, but will take you to all the local 10K SB programs throughout the nation. So again, thank you so much. I'm gonna let John say.
I was going to say our cohort 3 for Goldman Sachs starts in Central Ohio again in August, I believe. And so we've been through 2 iterations of this here in Central Ohio. It's expanded to Cincinnati and Dayton as well, and it is one of the most fun professional experiences that I have had. And plus, you get to see Audra there 4 times a week if we're virtual again this next go around. So,
all righty, thanks everybody. Have a great weekend. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks, Ellen. So nice seeing you.
Thank you.